Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Rory. Rory, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for, you need to know, Rory's been doing this ever since TGIF started, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So, TGIF is still previous millennium stuff. Well, seriously, it started before the new millennium and has been going ever since,
Wow.
except for some lockdowns. Yeah, and I think
And
Rory,
if I can interrupt you, Torsten, him and I have this agreement because back then I had even a crazier travel schedule than I have now. And Torsten and I had this agreement. Look, if you're ever stuck for a speaker and you call me up, if I'm available, I'll speak. So that's kind of what happened. Eh?
Well, but he's the stuck option.
Yeah, exactly.
So Rory's actually been very kind in saying, look, if you stuck at short notice,
Yeah,
I can
that's
do
it.
this. Whereas I think this one we had coming for a
Yes.
little while. This one is planned. Just saying. It's not, you don't get Rory the stuck option. You get Rory the planned option today. Let me read and then clear the floor. Rory is an internationally recognized security specialist. And he's running a global security consultancy. He served as a lieutenant colonel in the South African police many years ago, specializing, you see, this part I wouldn't get right without reading, in investigations, intelligence, VIP protection, and bomb disposal. So just saying you're safe here this morning. During Madiba's presidency, I think, as you all know, that's sort of, his big claim to fame in some ways. Rory was team leader in the president's personal protection team, and you will have probably heard him give those stories as well, which are actually, that's been a long time ago.
That's where we started. Yeah.
That's where we started, yeah. And Rory is a frequent speaker and commentator on security matters and regularly presents papers at conferences globally. And this is one of the big international events around which the G20 was organized. If you had road closures this morning, it wasn't for the G20, it was for this talk. And Rory, thank you so much again. Really appreciate
Pleasure,
it.
Torsten.
Go for it.
Morning, everybody. So with all of that said, let me just correct some of that. So Torsten calls me or WhatsApps me, I forget, after the interview I did on Biz News with my namesake, Chris Steyn. They have that that Sunday evening show that used to be called, or hosted by Neil de Beer, and then he lost his life. So they've now called that show the Neil de Beer slot. And he had a tremendous following as a political commentator. Now, in many ways, he was almost like a forerunner of where I am. This was a man who, like me, served in the police, but not just in the police, he served in the special branch. And then, because of some of the, let's call it the nefarious activities of the security branch, he became disillusioned, and ANC intelligence recruited him to work against the police for ANC intelligence, which he did, and he was then trained by Mkondo Sizwe outside of the country and re-infiltrated into the country and worked for the ANC between Madiba's release from prison in 1990 and him becoming president in 94. And then he became equally disillusioned with the ANC once he saw what was going on, and he thought, I didn't switch allegiances or cross the floor or whatever you want to call it, to serve a regime that is as corrupt as what the National Party was. So he left MK and the ANC and started the UIM, was it the UIM, the United Independent Movement, of which he was the president, narrowly failed to secure himself a seat in Parliament at the previous national elections, but he did secure a seat in the Western Cape Parliament, and then sadly lost his life to cancer about 2 months ago. So that show that he used to host on a Friday night now has various guests, and Chris Steyn contacted me right after General Mkwanazi made the statements that he did, and then the Matlala Commission started to hear evidence, as we all know. So on the back of that interview, Torsten calls me and says, would I speak on that at TGIF? And full disclosure, as I sit here before you, I'm still not entirely sure what to say about that interview or the context that the interview was conducted in at a Christian forum, but we're going to do our best. And I think that what we should do, Torsten, with your permission, is have even more Q&A this morning than what we ordinarily do, because I'm sure each one of us comes at this what is going on moment in our history from a variety of different perspectives. So that's what we're going to do, and I'll preface that by repeating some of the stuff that I said in the interview, stuff that I'm quite passionate about, and then we can chat about it. Pardon me. The first thing I want to say, guys, is that I'm not a politician. And in fact, I don't like many politicians. I think I can count on maybe one hand, but not more than two hands, politicians that I have any faith in or time for, because I find that politicians, by and large, and it's a massive generalization, they self-serving rather than serving the people that they should represent. And so I do not have a lot of time for them. So I'm not a politician, guys. All right. So Chris Steyn asks me to conduct this interview, and she asks me what is going on in the police. Now, as a former police officer, and you get police officers and then you get officers within the police, you get commissioned rank with pips and stuff on the shoulders rather than stripes and other stuff on the arm. So officers in the police are commissioned, and I was commissioned in 1987, having joined the police in 1982. So it took me 5 years to write the exams and go through the ranks, because even if you pass the exams, you can't get promoted from constable to sergeant, sergeant to warrant officer to lieutenant until you've served the time. In those days, it used to be 2 years between ranks, and then it became 18 months. And I was fortunate to get through there quite quickly because of an ingrown toenail. I'm in the police college for the whole year of 1982, and they teach you various things, mainly law. The Criminal Procedure Act was a subject throughout, and then common law, which is there are no statutes for, like things like murder and armed robbery. You don't have a murder act, but then you do have a Criminal Procedure Act, and you have, back in the apartheid years, you had the Group Areas Act, and you had all these statutes, which I really didn't like. I loved the common law side of law, but not the statutory stuff, learning it like a parrot. But anyway, at the end of the year, of that full year of training, you had an opportunity to write your sergeant exams, even though you still had to go and serve another 18 months before you could be promoted. That was the start of it. And I think the pass percentage was 4%. And the only reason I passed was because I landed up in the hospital with an ingrown toenail, and I had nothing other to do than to study those sergeant's exams, so I passed. But anyway, I was then commissioned, as I said, in 1987. And in 1990, when Mr. de Klerk made that historic announcement to release Mr. Mandela and all the political prisoners and unban all the political organizations, I was a major at the time in the old police force ranks before they civilianized the ranks and then went back to military ranks. But that's another story. But the major thing that happened was that obviously apartheid, as we know it, was a set of laws, a set of very iniquitous laws. But the Group Areas Act, the Jobs Reservations Act, the Immorality Act that prevented people from marrying across the color line, and all of those crazy laws were laws. So when de Klerk announces, I'm going to unban the banned organizations, release the political prisoners, he signs those laws off the statute books. And we, as the security branch, have got no more work at the stroke of a pen, because our job in defending or investigating crimes against the state was to defend the apartheid state, essentially. So when the security branch came knocking on my door, guys, they put me on the churches section. And it may surprise you, and I may have said this before in this forum, Torsten, I can't remember. Why would the security branch of the apartheid state have a churches section? Well, because a lot of the anti-apartheid funding, especially from the Scandinavian Dutch and German church organizations, was funneled to the underground structures that formed the UDF, you know, the End Conscription campaign, and many of the civic organizations that opposed apartheid. They received funding from Europe via the churches. And the apartheid state knew that, so they had to have a churches section. But they were also very reticent to put a heavy hand on the church, being proud Calvinists themselves. Anyway, I get recruited because I'm English speaking to the John Vorster Square security branch, and I'm told you're on the churches section. And my brief is go upstairs to the 11th floor to the technical division where the bugged telephones are bugged. Get a recording of the person whose telephone you are going to listen to and write down anything subversive. That was my brief. A very green, very naive, very wet behind the ears still warrant officer got that brief. So I went up there and I got those old reel-to-reel tapes, guys. You remember them? The headphones on, and now I must make notes of anything subversive. I can only understand about 30% of the conversations because the other 70% were in African languages and I didn't speak them at the time. So the lady whose phone was bugged was a lady called Miriam Kadana. She's no longer with us today. And she was the secretary to the general secretary of the SACC, a German by the name of Dr. Wolfram Kistner.
No.
You must know. And Dr. Wolfram Kistner had just taken over that position as general secretary from Archbishop Tutu. And it's his secretary whose phones. I've never met the lady. I don't know what I'm doing, but that's my brief. Imagine my shock and surprise. So that's about 86, I think. 86, 87 maybe. Yeah, around there, mid-80s. If you fast forward the movie now to 1990, de Klerk does what I've said he did, and we've got no more work, so they don't know what to do with me. I'm now a lieutenant, a very green, very naive, very wet behind the ears, young lieutenant. They say, you, Steyn, go and start a VIP protection unit. Yeah, at John Vorster. So I do. Why? Because the National Party government was complete anathema to the diplomatic community and the business community at the time. Nobody wanted anything to do with the National Party minister. But de Klerk makes that announcement, and now every government in the world is telling their ambassador, hey, find out where that and what is the path that announcement is going to take. So everybody wants a piece of National Party politicians now, as do the business community, thinking we need to know how we can access those global markets that we were refused access to previously. So they were moving around and needed protection, and I was instructed to start a VIP protection unit. So that's 1990. 94, I now inherit a president who has an office and a home in Joburg, where I'm the commander of the VIP unit. Because President Mandela did not live in the official residence in Pretoria, in Mahlamba-Ndlovu. He lived in his own residence in Houghton, and we had to drive him up the highway. So the first day that I start there, January of 96, I was one of two team leaders. The other team leader was led by my colleague, Jason Chabalala. So Jason says, Rory, just go down to the office and go and introduce yourself to the staff. And while you're there, get the program for next week. Imagine my surprise when I walk into the office of the Principal Private Secretary to the President of the Republic of South Africa, and it's Mary Mkladana. I walk in there and I introduce myself, and she says, would you like a cup of tea while I print the program? I said, yes, please. I said, Sis Mary, before we start, let me just say the following. I said, you were the secretary to Dr. Wolfram Kistner. She says, yes. I said, I was the security branch cop who bugged your phone. And there's this pregnant silence. And I'm thinking I can either get fired or we can sort this out now. And she throws back her head and she roars with laughter and says to me, in what other country can this conversation take place? And that's a fair comment. You know, a freedom fighter and a security branch cop now serving the most famous man in the world who's become our president. So I just wanted to set that scene. So, and when I started on Madiba's team in 94, I'd then been promoted from major to lieutenant colonel. I never applied for another promotion because it would have meant I would have had to come off the operational teams and go into an office somewhere. And please, no, I was far too young and didn't want to do that. So I started with Madiba as a lieutenant colonel, and I finished in 99 on the day that he left office on the 16th of June as a lieutenant colonel. The point is, I only had 2 more ranks to go: full colonel, brigadier, and then you're a general. So all of these generals are my juniors in terms of tenure. If I'd stayed a cop, I would have been senior to all of them. And that was the basis upon which Chris conducted this interview, because what was starting to come out in the early testimony within the Commission of Inquiry is that a number of senior, and it's not everybody, but a number of senior police generals are completely compromised and are deeper than what even I thought into organized crime and some of the stuff that's going on. You know, they talk about this big 5 cartel. First time I'd ever heard of it, but there's a lot of organized crime that is pervasive throughout the criminal community. What do I mean by that? I mean that drug dealers are in the same syndicates as gun runners, in the same syndicates as human traffickers. So it's no longer the opportunistic street crime and a hijacking here and a house robbery there. It's planned and orchestrated from people pulling strings from higher up. And you know, back in the day, our then police commissioner, who was the what's the word? What's the senior civil servant in each department called again? The Director General. Thank you. So you get a minister and a deputy minister. They're politicians, but the people that actually do the work are the directors general and their civil servants below them. And Jackie Salibi was the Director General of the Department of Foreign Affairs, and then he became Commissioner of Police and head of Interpol. And he was found to be compromised by organized crime in the person of Glenn Agliotti and a number of other people. And just let us never forget that Jackie Salibi went to prison for 120,000 Rand corruption charge. These guys looted Tembisa Hospital to the tune of 2.3 billion and are driving around in Lamborghinis and Bugatti Veyrons and Maybachs, while the gogo in the township can't access healthcare, and cancer patients within that hospital's catchment area do not have any access to radiation therapy or chemotherapy. And the guy, the journalist, Luke, is it Luke Giles? Not Luke Giles, Luke, somebody who wrote the book recently, Wicks, that's him, thank you, Jeff Wicks. Jeff Wicks said, what kind of psychopath does it take to loot or steal from a public hospital? But the point is that the rot is so much deeper than I think all of us thought. So I was asked to comment on the police, the senior police officers' involvement in that. And I made a few statements that I'm going to make again today and clarify, because I think we've arrived at a point where you kind of need a clean house and get rid of, certainly in intelligence. Our intelligence has been compromised for far too long. And there is precedent in Colombia, where they had tremendous police and military collusion within the drug cartels, going way back to before Pablo Escobar. The president, when he cleaned house, he got rid of everybody in intelligence and actually brought in a foreign consultant to rebuild the intelligence structures from the ground up, so that they made sure that there was no remnant of that compromise left. And I asked the question whether we haven't perhaps arrived at that point in South Africa within our intelligence structures. Remember, in intelligence, you have police intelligence, that I'll speak about a little more in a second. You have military intelligence, and then you have the 2 state security agencies, the one that concentrates on internal threats and the one that concentrates in external threats. So in all of our embassies and high commissions, we have intelligence officers. Some are declared, so the host government knows that guy's an intelligence officer, and some are not declared. They're underground working in intelligence. So there's kind of 4 intelligence services. And the crime intelligence service is the one that I have the most knowledge of. I don't have much knowledge of the others, only that I've worked with some of them. But the crime intelligence service is the new iteration of the old special branch. So when Mr. de Klerk signed the apartheid laws off the statute books, what do you do now with this security branch that are without work because, as I said, there's no more statutes? And somebody very wise decided, well, let's take that special branch, security police, and let's focus the same energies that they did on defending the apartheid state on crime. And they changed the name from the security police or the special branch. They changed the name to the Crime Intelligence Service. And if you think about it, that's actually a very bright move. The problem was that the Crime Intelligence Service probably became the most compromised unit within the South African Police Service. So a very noble idea with much merit turned out to be one of the things that we should probably be most ashamed of as cops and former cops. Terrible abuse of that so-called slush fund and all of that, because there are secret funds within those intelligence services, because you've got to pay informers. So you register informers, you pay them, and there's one testifying right now, Brown Mogotsi. If you've been following either Madlanga Commission or the parliamentary subcommittee's interrogation of what's going on, he is claiming to have been a security agent, a police informer. And Arthur Cheskelson is busy pulling that testimony apart in the Madlanga Commission right now. It'll continue, I think, today. So, where was I? So, the intelligence services, I believe there's a strong argument for just cleaning up, cleaning the house, getting somebody else in, even if it's a foreigner. I don't know whether that's the right way, but get somebody who's completely unconnected to those structures today and rebuild it. But as a cop, I said at the time in that interview, and that was the title of this talk, if you saw, that I think it's time for true courage from our leaders. In certain Scandinavian countries, there is precedent for what I'm going to say. If you are a police officer, you may not have any affiliation to any political party. So you serve the government of the day, irrespective of who that government is. And that has resonance in my world, because when we protect, in my case, we protected the president. It really doesn't matter what individual, what person's name the president is. You protect that office because that office has dignity or should have dignity, and you protect it without fear or favor. So in those Scandinavian countries, police officers who swear the oath of office, they swear allegiance to the state, not to a party or a person, and they cannot vote. So if you're a cop there, you give up your right to vote. So you can't even determine who the government is that you're going to serve. But then they don't pay income tax. And I can tell you that if you gave that option to our police, a lot of them will opt for it. So that's how we could arrive at a completely, not independent, a completely, yes, independent, but apolitical police service, where those cops, if you have to sign, when you swear the oath of office and you sign your name next to the code of conduct and the constitution that you swear to uphold, you abrogate any form of political affiliation. And you swear to serve the people of the Republic of South Africa and the government of the day, irrespective of who it is and how often it changes. So you have complete independence. You don't pay income tax, but you can't vote for that government. And I think it's time for that in our country, because I personally can't think, as a former cop, how do we undo this mess that we're in? How do you undo it? Because it's so deep. The rot is now so deep. Excuse me. And the compromise is so pervasive that and there are many honest cops out there on a daily basis. I started a charity in 2018, Torsten, that raises funds for the widows and orphans of police officers that are killed in the line of duty, because that thin blue line really does exist. It's there. And it stands in the gap for all of us. And irrespective of what you and I think of the performance of our police, and we've chatted a little bit about that, it's never the fault of that little boy or girl of 2 or 3 years old if their mom or dad is murdered by a violent criminal. How can it be the child's fault? And who looks after those kids is the reason that I decided when you come to this stage of your life where you think you must give back a bit, the easy thing, and I often say the cheesy thing for me to do, would have been to raise funds for the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. The fund that Madiba started with the money that he received in Oslo when he jointly won the Nobel Peace Prize with F.W. de Klerk. He took that $150,000 and he started the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, and he gave a third of his salary every month straight to that fund. And now they receive a lot of corporate backing. So I think, no, man, they've got enough, or they get enough backing. If I'm going to raise money, it needs to be for my own. So that when I was a cop, you had a R2 automatic, non-negotiable, compulsory deduction from your pay sheet. You only had 3 lines on the pay sheet. It said salary, PAYE, and widow and orphans fund. Weerdeweer en Weersfonds, because the pay sheet was 1 month in English and 1 month in Afrikaans back in those days. And I often wondered, where's that R2 going? And then I had my first child and realized that if I were to be killed in the line of duty, there was somebody taking care of my wife and then first child. And I was very grateful for that. Now it's a R20 per month deduction, and it's no longer compulsory, thanks to the unions. So the unions got involved because somebody said, I don't want to pay that R20. And I just don't understand that, because those cops, and I've seen this because I travel widely, it doesn't matter where you go in the world, there are 2 brotherhoods or sisterhoods that you will find. You will find a brotherhood of runners. You can go anywhere in the world. If you're a runner, just Google if there's a running club, phone them up and they'll say, come and join us, we're meeting there, and you'll immediately feel at home. And cops. Cops are a subculture anywhere in the world. And we should be looking after one another's children, like in the African idiom of taking a village to raise a child. We should be that concerned. And Top Crew, being the police union, somehow got it through that it's now voluntary. Anyway, I digress. So I believe we've arrived at that point in our history where we need a completely apolitical and independent police service so that we serve the people first and foremost, and only that. And you must swear that as part of your oath. So that is part of the solution as I see it, to rid our police force of this corruption. And in thinking about how do I make this applicable to TGIF, well, I thought of 3 biblical characters, Daniel, Joseph, and Esther. My favorite story among all of those has got to be Joseph. I just love his life story, from getting sold into slavery by his brothers to becoming the prime minister of Egypt and getting imprisoned for sexual harassment unfairly by his employer, and then still becoming the prime minister of Egypt, and then saving his family and his people from famine. It just encompasses so many chapters of Genesis that I love the story. But Esther is equally a favorite of mine, because her cousin Mordecai, who is now being persecuted by this madman, this narcissistic anti-Semite who wants to wipe out Mordecai and his entire people. So, by the way, the Holocaust as we know it under Hitler was nothing new. There are many biblical examples of how people attempted to wipe out the Jewish people. Even Nero tried it at the birth of Christ. Herod, I'm sorry, not Nero. Herod tried it at the birth of Christ by killing all the Hebrew boys. But he says to her, Mordecai says to Esther, who, if you know the story, she was the culmination of a year-long search for a new queen of Persia, because the previous queen of Persia, Queen Vashti, disobeyed the king when he called her to a banquet, and she decided not to go for whatever reason and embarrassed him. And all his advisors went to the king and said, no, man, we can't have this, because if the queen disobeys the king, what are all the other women in this kingdom going to do when their husbands instruct them to do something? So we can't have that. So you need to get rid of the queen. And he does. And then he sends his eunuchs into the kingdom, and they find all these beautiful women and pamper them with treatments. And eventually Esther, who secretly is a Jewess, becomes the new a queen of Persia. And her cousin says to her, Esther, perhaps it is for a time like this that you have been born, because she's got to go to the king and expose this murderous plot against the people, her people. And of course, she saves the Jewish nation from extermination, and the rest is history. But I sometimes wonder whether we haven't arrived at that position in our country. Now, I'm not saying that Lieutenant General Lucky Mkhwanazi is that person. But my word, when he made that press conference statement on the 6th of June this year, he seriously disrupted a lot of what we now understand to have been going on all the time. And I think it might be a prayer that all of us need to be praying. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you pray to God that he would raise up his people wherever they are in our government. And there are many Christians. There are many good people in our government. Not everybody is a rotten apple. But I think the time has come that we need somebody to seriously raise their head above the parapet and gather around them, almost like a phalanx of people, of Christians, men and women, who say, enough of this now. I don't know what that looks like. You can only change governments, in my view, at the ballot box. We don't want coup d'etats. We don't want violent uprising or Arab Springs. I don't think that that achieves much if you are a person who believes in order, as I do. And by the way, I'll hold my hand up again. I'm not a paragon of virtue in that I necessarily believe that every law is brilliant. I too get very frustrated with just stupid lawmaking and things, and I don't keep to all of the law. So I'm not putting myself up there as this paragon of virtue, as I said. But I do think we've arrived at a kind of moment in time where we need somebody like an Esther or a Joseph, that the Lord, or a Daniel for that matter. Remember what Daniel said when the king threw him into the lion's den. He said, even if my God does not, or was that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they got chucked into the fiery furnace? They said to him, even if our Lord does not rescue us from them, we're still not going to bow down to that image. And I think that's what we need. We need that kind of not only moral courage, but conviction in our hearts that of whom it is that we serve. First and foremost, we Christians serve God and his laws. And I think we've arrived possibly at that point. So I think, Torsten, let me stop there and allow for questions and debate. I must say right up front that I might not have all the answers, because I'm not a politician. I'm purely a former cop who is very distressed about what has become of our police and how we put an end to it. And therefore, my solution is this radical courage.
So I mean, I'm not being facetious or anything. I'm sure that's the question. Do you think Mkhwanazi is a politician or a cop?
Oh, no. So the question is, do I think Mkhwanazi is a politician or a cop? I think he's a cop. Why do I say that? One, because he's come through the ranks and arrived at the position of Lieutenant General, which is the most senior position other than the Commissioner of Police. There's only one full general in an army or in a police, and that's the commissioner or the commander. Everybody, the next ranks below him are lieutenant generals, and then your major generals, and then your brigadiers. So Lucky Mkhwanazi has got a very, very interesting history in the police. So he comes out of the special task force, and if you remember, he was criticized for it. But if you remember at that press conference, he's in his camouflage with his task force wings on his chest. When I was the team leader of Madiba's protection team, and we went into high-risk areas, we would call upon the special task force to be that outer perimeter of protection. So they're there to fight the wars. We're not there to draw firearms and start shooting people. Our job is to get the president away from any of that stuff. So we were the inner ring, They were always the outer ring. And he was a young sergeant at the time in the special task force that worked with us on occasion when we went into high-risk areas with the president. And he continued to progress through the ranks. So he is not a mampara like Ria Pieja, who was parachuted in because she was politically connected or whatever. And she was one of the most useless commissioners of police. And she had absolutely she inspired zero confidence amongst policemen and women on the ground. These men and women on the ground look at Lucky Mkonazi and they say, thank God for him, because they know he has our back because he's come through the ranks. Now, having said that, I'm not saying necessarily that everything that General Mkonazi says is true or is accurate or is right, because none of us ever know all of the facts. But my very strong sense is that at least 90% of what he's saying is the truth. And there might be people that come out and pull some of the skeletons out of Lucky Mkonazi's closet, and then he must deal with it. And he says, I will face that stuff. But by and large, this is a man who had the courage of his convictions, I believe, to call out a minister of police who he knew to be compromised. I can only applaud that. So I don't think he's a politician. I could be wrong. Of course I could be wrong. But my sense as a cop is he's a policeman's policeman. And that's what we need. Whoever it is who takes over at the end of the day cannot be a political appointment. It's one of the faults, if I may be so bold as to say so, it's one of the faults that I see in, for example, an American system where your police commissioner is an elected official. So he is politically aligned or affiliated. I see a problem with that. I want a guy who's completely independent of politics and who has started walking the beat somewhere, been trained, been promoted slowly but surely, gathered his knowledge base, and then eventually he arrives at the rank of Lieutenant General, where he is the provincial commissioner of all the cops in KZN. That's the kind of general I would want, as my commander. Yes, sir.
So one of the suggestions that you had was the clean house, right? And
In intelligence,
yeah, in intelligence. So what's going to happen with them? Let's say it does happen that in house now you have all these people with special expertise and whatnot, no longer working.
Yeah.
Right. And what I've noticed also thanks to social media is that, especially in places like Mexico, is that all the cartels apparently are full of people who are former soldiers and all those things. So wouldn't that also be disadvantaged? Because you also mentioned that some of these crime syndicates are using intelligence now. It's no longer, it's organized crime.
Absolutely.
So how then are we going to counter them being used as now people in the crime syndicates? Because I'm sure all of them are going to say, okay, I'm no longer in the crime intelligence, but I also need ways to make money.
Yeah.
And somebody's going to knock your door like, okay, would like to use your expertise to do this. What's going to happen with that then?
It's a great question. And I think that we are already there somewhat, because we all know that a lot of these cash in transit heists have been perpetrated by military trained people from the former liberation movements that didn't get a position within the government and still have access to arms, and they know how to put together a proper operation so that they can hijack a truck full of cash or whatever it is that they target. So to a certain extent, we already have that now. But your point is extremely well made, because without doubt, in my view, if you clean house and get rid of all those intelligence officers, look, the good ones are quite open to reapplying, undergoing whatever verification tests are required and re-enlisting. And the rotten apples are prevented from re-enlisting. They are going to get swept up by the cartels, there's no doubt. But those cartels and these criminal syndicates need to be the focus of this new, cleaner police force. We need better training. We need better equipment. We need to fill all of the posts. I cannot understand that in a country where we have such a high youth unemployment rate, and where we have so many graduate South Africans who come through high school, have gone to university, and are sitting with degrees and qualifications and can't get work, why has the police never tapped into that stratum of our youth I mean, can you imagine taking, I don't know, give me a number, 100. Take 100 such people, graduates without work, that are intelligent people, and put them in a room and put up a big fat whiteboard with a clean slate and say to all of them, now you tell me, how would you fix crime in our country? Why aren't we listening to our youth? Why aren't we listening to people, disillusioned as they are, operating out there in society, who can't get work for whatever reason? Why don't we recruit them into our police? We've got, I don't know how many vacancies. It's in the tens of thousands of vacancies that are unfilled. Why aren't we filling them with the brightest minds in our country? People who are prepared to go through that training. But I'm digressing now, but your question is such a valid one. Without a doubt, those people will end up in criminal syndicates. And it might sound like pie in the sky, but I think that the solution is, because we know that that is going to happen, let's empower a brand new, non-aligned police force. That was the word I was searching for. A non-aligned police service to fight against all of that organized crime, with a new intelligence structure that is reporting nothing else other than what the criminals are doing, not what the politicians are doing and where you are aligned within political structures, because that's what has happened here. The intelligence services eye was no longer on the ball. They were almost playing the man, deciding where they are going to align themselves, because who will be the next president of the ANC and therefore the next president of the Republic was the focus. Whereas crime and criminals should be the focus. So I hope that goes some way towards answering your question, because there's no doubt you are absolutely correct that those compromised intelligence officials will find their way into criminal syndicate. Yes.
I have a small issue with one thing you said. You said we need to find some good people, and you said Christian people. Good people are not all Christian.
Absolutely.
And so I think you should just rest it at good people, because Christians get compromised, and I would say that most of the so-called Christians in America are compromised at the moment. And but that's just a comment.
I certainly wasn't saying that only Christians can be the solution to this. Not at all. I was just saying that as we as Christians ask God to allow those of us who serve in public service to take a leadership role, as we do with that, we should also pray that He will raise up good leaders, irrespective of their religion, in this country that can stand against what we are seeing. So if I may clarify that, absolutely. Okay. Yes, sir.
So, comment from me. When I was a child, I was always told, you're in trouble, find a policeman, and policeman will help you out. I don't feel that I could say that to a child today. I find it very hard to differentiate between the police and the criminals, be that the SAPS or the Metro. It's different today. And I think part of the problem the way I see it is around, and obviously it's around money, but why? Why aren't we attracting the graduates? Why aren't we engaging? We've got so many free posts available.
Yeah.
But do we pay the police? And I'm not being funny when I say that, because when I look at the problem with the crime and the police, is see a balance between need and greed. And if the police aren't paid a livable salary, or a salary that's measures up to what they do, and they need more money, then the greed becomes.
They're going to find other ways.
Right. And so when you say a clean sweep through the intelligence, that doesn't really answer the problem when it comes to money and salaries.
Okay, so let me say this. I'll say two things in response to your comment and question. Firstly is, and I must correct Austin in a minor way here. So I no longer run the security company that I formed in '99 when I left the police. That's 26 years ago. So I had almost 18 years of service as a cop. I started a security company with my late business partner in '99, and it's still going today, but I'm no longer the CEO that runs it. Because I'm tired, guys. 44 years. I don't jump out of bed in the morning and say, yay, I'm going to the office. I don't, because things like this charity, things like ministry are more what floats my boat. So we have a young CEO that runs that company. But my point is, back in the day, back in 99 into the early 2000s, we were always, and still are, the genesis of our business is VIP protection. So given my background and that of my late business partner, who trained a lot of the ANC personnel in civilian private security, he and I started the company. We would recruit mainly from police VIP units, which was my background, military VIP units, or police and military that we just had to then give the VIP aspect of training to. Today, we can almost no longer afford to recruit there because they're too highly paid. We cannot match those salaries because we've got this bloated civil service. We all know that. The unions keep pushing for these increases every year. So policemen and women, in my view, are not terribly paid. They're not terribly paid. So I don't think that lack of a decent salary with benefits is the reason. I think it's more the greed. It's more the opportunity that they see to augment that salary through getting money from other dark and dodgy places. So that's the first thing I'll say. They're not paid. The second thing I'll say is that I find it so sad, but you're right. I find it so sad that you cannot any longer say to a child, the police are your friend. I go out of my way to try and tell children that, still today, because I find that it's a tragedy if the youngest and most vulnerable amongst us can't trust a cop. And I think, if I may say so, I think you may be surprised. I think you may be surprised that if a child were to, think of a hypothetical situation, if a child were to approach a cop in uniform, I don't think they're going to be rejected or slapped aside. But it is becoming, or has become, increasingly difficult to continue with this faith that we had. You know, I've got many Afrikaans friends, even though I'm English speaking South African. And I lived next door to a wonderful old Afrikaner and his wife. They could hardly speak English. They came from the Free State, where they worked on the Harmony gold mine and basically died of typhus, as so many of those miners do. And he said to me, when they grew up on the platteland, they were taught there are three people that you can trust in society: the dominee, the policeman, and the teacher. And you're right. We need to get back to a position where we can teach our children that a policeman is your friend, and you can approach a policeman or woman at any time and ask them for help, and they're going to help you. But I think you may be pleasantly surprised. I think I would even go so far as to say, even a corrupt cop, if a child approaches him, he's probably still going to help the child.
So then, is the problem then a character?
Yes.
And so why are people with good character being employed in the police?
So that is a problem. So there is I do believe that there is a failing within our vetting and pre-employment screening processes in the police, which is why, to my brother's question at the back there, when we start to clean house and people are able to re-enlist, that needs to be very, very thoroughly done. And I think it's a resource and funding issue. We're just not putting the money in the right place. Now, I can tell you again, as an employer, because I'm still a director of that company and I'm still a shareholder and I still work daily in my business. I just don't run it. I'm not the oak who's in there at 8 o'clock in the morning and leaves the office at 6 anymore. But we have very strong vetting lines, because leopards and spots is an absolutely true cliche that you can have the most brilliant worker, but if he's a crook, if there's something wrong with his character, he's going to bite you in the butt at some point, because leopards don't change their spots. So we always recruit on values and character, and then train the skills. Now, that might not be novel or revolutionary. I'm sure a lot of companies do that. So you try and recruit good people that you then train to have the skills to do whatever job you want them to do. But don't start with the skills and find out that you've got a bad apple, because he will always be a bad apple. But my point is that it starts with a diligent and thorough pre-employment and vetting process. So of all of those unemployed graduates, I'm sure you're going to find some there that are not suitable. But I can't understand the logic of why we've got 30 or 40,000 vacancies. We've got all these unemployed young people who are bright with degrees that can't find work. How can that be? I don't understand.
Just a quick private to what you said. Liberton cannot change his boss. Good people can subsequently be corrupted
Absolutely.
by lousy culture. So
You're quite right.
both of those factors.
Which is why the pre-employment screening and vetting that you do must continue. Because a person who may be clean, that's the right expression, who may be clean at the point of employment, can run into things like debt and then become corrupted. You're quite right. So you need to kind of stay on top of that.
I think again, it's what's the saying? Death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yes.
I think one of the things that I've noticed that there's a decline in terms of moral values, right? While everybody's saying this is my truth and all those things, so it means that it is hard to hold somebody accountable to a standard that they've included.
Great.
And I think one of the issues that we face as believers and people who believe in good is that everybody believes in good, you know, because I do think that even in the cops and all that, people will say, no, I don't want that. This is what I want to do. So I think it's just making sure or trying to develop accountable measures or accountability structures that are almost fail proof, you know, to whatever extent that looks like, you know, because even now, if you can look at how everything is going, the reason why sometimes there's a disdain for cops is because I want to do what I feel is right. So if the cop stands as the moral, the moral standard that is in contention with what I believe, they will be seen as the bad guys. And also, it's also a cultural thing, you know, if you don't come from a society or you don't like being held accountable, so anything that resembles accountability will be disliked. And another issue that we're also fighting, I think, is social media, because I do believe that whoever controls the narrative can tell the story. You know, there are good things that the government does, but unfortunately, they're not spread out, you know, in terms of, oh, this is what the government is. Because even if you can go to your Twitter, your social media, there's an influx of bad information that you, as a Christian, like, God, I mean, I know I have all these dreams, but just come now, you know, to end this.
It's such a great point that my friend raises, because one of the things that you lose very quickly when you are a young cop is naivety. I'll give you an example. You finish your police training, you go to your police station and they deploy you, and you're out on the beat, or you're in the police van as a young cop, and on a Friday night you are called to a domestic dispute and a wife has been beaten up, and all you want to do is wring the neck of that drunk husband who beat her up. You learn very quickly that you need to listen to both sides of the story, even in a situation like that. So I often say that I lost my naivety very fast because I was a cop. That cops will tell you about the University of Life. You learn very fast. But people will also tell me, my own family, never mind my business associates, will often say, Rory, you're too soft. So my business partners will say, you know, if anybody needs a loan in the company, they'll go to Rory and ask him, and I'll probably approve it. So your point about those standards is really one of naivety, and social media has done a lot of harm. But one of the things I believe social media has done, and what it should be doing, is removed our naivety. Because if you believe everything that is retweeted by some bot on X, you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble if you start perpetuating that and sending it on. So we've learned to filter that stuff, and we've learned to a degree not to be naive about everything we read in social media. So my own son, who works in our company, also says, Dad, you're too soft with these people. You need to take a harder line. He tells me that. But he said something very profound to me about 2 years ago. We were in the, you know, when you get home from work and mom and dad are pottering around in the kitchen getting the meal ready, and then the kids come in and out and you start chatting as a family. And he said to me, you know, Dad, you and Uncle Kirby, that's my brother, he says, you guys are so fortunate because you come from the golden generation. I said, what do you mean by that, my boy? He said, you never grew up with social media. You never had to deal with this phenomenon of social media. And I guess what he was saying was that the modern generation has so many more influences, good and bad, that they've got a filter that we never had to worry about. Yes, there were others. And I think of the verse in Ecclesiastes that tells us quite correctly that there's nothing new under the sun. Violence was there when God destroyed the earth with the flood in Noah's day. Violence, read it in Genesis chapter 3. It talks about violence of man. And there's nothing new under the sun. It just sticks its head out or manifests, thank you. It manifests itself in different ways. That means that we can't be naive as Christians. What does the Bible say? Be as wise as does. Exactly. And so but thank you for your comment. You're quite right. Yeah.
So maybe on that note, it's about discernment, and you started to say that, but what we can do. You used the example of Esther, and that's a fortunate and a very unfortunate example as well, because the Queen Vashti, she was the one with the principles. It was a serious party, I forget now, but everybody was seriously drunk, and they told her, "Come and show yourself," and she said,
"Come and show your beauty."
Yeah. So if you talk to the feminists or anybody with principles, she was the one with principles. But Esther again, she compromised everything. Herself totally, no question. And then at some point, for a time such as this, as you said. So I don't know.
Very interesting perspective. That
so what do we do? What are your thoughts on that?
Now in this context.
Yeah, in this context.
Well, I think it's time for courage. I think it's time for bravery. And I think it's time for South Africans, to my friend at the back's point there, not just Christians, but anybody who has got good values and good character. Now is our time to say this is enough, in whatever form that looks like. And remember that remember the parable of the talents. He doesn't give everybody 5 that became 10. But everybody has an opportunity to influence their own environment and the people around them to some degree. And I think the time has never been more profound as what it is now for people with good character, good values and integrity and morals to say, I'm not going to get involved in that kind of stuff any further, and I'm going to speak up against it, and I'm going to hold people within my sphere of influence accountable. I think we're there. And all I'm saying that as a former cop, if I am asked, how do we deal with this rot that is right up at the top of the police service? That's my solution. I'm saying it calls for extraordinary courage now, from especially we Christians, but not just Christians. Yeah.
So I was just going to follow on from what you just said. How does that start with us here who don't have connections, who don't have the kind of authority or voice to make a big difference in the top levels? What would you say to us in terms of our practical everyday lives? How can we influence the area that you have an interest in?
So Vera, that's possibly one of the questions that I don't have the complete answer or set of answers to, other than to say what I probably didn't say very eloquently earlier, was that wherever we are, wherever we do have influence, and I don't think we should now be seeking to all of a sudden jump into spheres that we don't have access to because we're going on this crusade. I think we must be calm about it, but we must be very certain in our minds that we have arrived at a moment in our history where enough is enough of a compromised state, a compromised police service, and a compromised intelligence community that affects us all. So where you do have influence, and it might even be as confined as your own home, but we all work, we've all got a circle of friends. I think we need to take the conversation to those spheres of influence, even just to our friendship circles. So when we meet, when I meet with our men's Bible study, I think it's a question that we should ask and debate there, and not have a moaning and whinging session, but have something that we. What are you guys doing? Are you ordering breakfast now? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we get you one.
Yeah, So, yeah, I don't know whether that's helpful, Vera, because I
I was
honestly
wondering,
don't know.
okay, so one of the things that maybe we could talk about is, what do we do when we're asked for cool drink?
When we ask for?
Cool drink, man.
Oh, no, I never paid that.
So, you know,
Absolutely
like
not.
that's a,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just refuse. I always tell them, the first thing I do is tell the cops that stop me that I am a former police officer. And if I've done anything wrong, I'll say, guys, sorry, I admit it. And I'll thank you for the work that you're doing. If I've exceeded the speed limit, just give me the fine. I will never pay a hood.
No, I went it was a big for
Years.
2 years. And the one thing, and because, you know, in spite of the political situation, all that, but the Catholic background, you'd be asked for a bribe and you would tell them, no, that's against my religion. So that is that sort of, that somebody would ask you, oh, what religion is that? You know, as if all religions wouldn't sort of be against bribes, but that's the point. So,
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah.
Michael?
but they respected that, yeah.
No, it wasn't Michael. It was,
Was it? Oh, was it?
yeah. I thought it was Michael's hand, but it was Vera's hand behind it. Yeah.
Was my
So my point maybe I'll answer to here as well, because a couple of weeks ago, we had what we got still talking about the national dialogue.
Yes.
Maybe that's a space where we can talk about this.
100%. I was very inspired by that talk. I had no idea that it wasn't just the sham filter and naivety. It wasn't just the shambles that were shown to be on social media, and even in the broad-based media, where people were shouting at one another. There was a lot of good dialogue that happened there, and I was quite inspired to become a part of that. Quite happy to, because of what Bobby and Gillian Godsall presented here a few weeks ago. Yeah, good point.
So this is probably also not a big question because you're not on the inside track on that, but so now we have 2 commissions of inquiry. Are we getting anywhere near sort of the kingpins, not just by way of we suspect who they are because we have but something that's sort of more watertight and correct. And if not there, are there other things, okay, that's the one you won't know, happening outside of the public radar that actually are getting to?
Yeah, so I don't know, Torsten, but that is a very, very good point. Now we're getting to where the rubber hits the road, because if you watch that interview that I did with Steyn, one of the things that I was very, very clear about there was that it's lovely to have the Matlanga Commission and have all of this stuff coming out in the public domain and in the parliamentary subcommittee. But unless people are charged, convicted, and go to jail, what is the point? We spent over 2 billion rand on the Zondo Commission, and I'm not saying there were no prosecutions, because that too is incorrect. There have been people convicted and there are ongoing prosecutions, but our National Prosecuting Authority is another branch of government that is very poorly logistically supported. There are not enough prosecutors. They get pulled away from that work because they're overworked and possibly can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. We need an NPA that is robust, that is well paid, that is well resourced, so that we can go after these prosecutions. Because what is the point of all of this, other than to allow all of us to have whinging sessions around the dry fire and the dining room table or at TGIF, if there are no consequences? And consequence management has become another cliche or buzzword in our society, but it's an absolute fact that if there are no consequences, we are not going to stop this. So, to answer your question, let's hope that what comes out of the Matlanga Commission in some big report that will take a while to write is sufficient evidence to charge the Cat McLaughlins of the world, even though he's on trial for murder in a completely unrelated thing. He killed his girlfriend. But those people need to pay and be seen to be paying for their crimes.
and charge some of the cops.
For sure.
But
Some of the cops
some of their careers are pretty much over.
Yeah.
That's at least can happen.
Yeah.
At least that will happen.
But look at the Zondo Commission. And again, I'm saying I'm not a politician, but you see the Zondo Commission. You saw the likes of Lucky Montana and Brian Molefe there. They're sitting in Parliament now.
But they were earning 20 million plus Z bonuses, and now they're earning a million and a half because they've blown away.
I know, but I'm not seeing consequences.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah. I think we should call it there, Torsten, because
Thank
I've
you,
got a
Rory,
hard stop
yes.
in 5 minutes, but I think this was a worthwhile session.
Very much so, thank
may,
you.
may I just encourage all of us, me included, to do what I was trying to explain to Vera, is let's just be those people that say, I'm not buying you cool drink. And wherever I have some form of influence, I need to say that we need to be examples. Certainly as Christians, we need to be examples. But as men and women of character, we need to be examples and do what we can to say, this can't carry on. And because I promise you guys, I travel. There is nowhere else on planet Earth like this country. We've got the best people. We really have got extraordinary people in our country. But we've also got the propensity to elect mamparas. How is this possible? I don't understand it, but we've got such a beautiful place. This country could be, because we all know that Africa, the African continent, is now the place where there will be the most economic growth, because everybody else is stagnating. They're on a plateau. Africa will grow. We need to be the rose in that garden here, because we've got everything going for us. We've got minerals, we've got beauty, we've got great people. We just need to get rid of very backward economic systems so that people can have jobs. Anyway, I'm not a politician. Thank you. Already. Yeah.